Okay. That's the recording started. So I now take the sedation for the Education Resources Committee on 8th of February 2022. I can see in attendance I have Councillor Alex Allison, John Anderson. I can't see Councillor Burns. Councillor Burns in the meeting? I don't see Councillor Burns. Present have Councillor Margaret Cooper, Margaret Cowie, Peter Craig, Mary Donnelly, Isabel Dorman. I can't see Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Dryborough in the meeting? No. Also have Councillor Fagan present, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Harrow, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Hose, Councillor Loudon, Councillor McAdams. I don't see Councillor McAdams in the meeting.
I'm here, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McAdams. Also have present Councillor McCarlin, Councillor Mars, Councillor Miller, Councillor Naylon, Councillor Nugent. I have apologies for Councillor Razak, and I have Councillor Devlin in attendance as substitute. I don't see Councillor Ross in the meeting. Councillor Ross present. No, I have Councillor Scott present, Councillor Walker and Councillor Watson. Can I just ask, the external representatives are not showing up on my screen. Can I just check if John Mulligan is present?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Dr. Iskander? No. Gillian Coulter? No. Andy Harvey?
Present.
Thanks, Andy. Anne-Marie Hobson?
Apologies.
Thank you. I see Hilary Kirby's in the meeting, and can I check if Christine Hall is in the meeting?
Present, here.
That's great. Chair, that's me. I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Tracy. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting, which is the final Education Committee meeting of this session of the Council. We've got a fairly chunky agenda today, so please try to keep your questions to brief questions, and we'll take supplements if necessary and use the hands up function. We'll also keep an eye on the time in case we're running into time where we might need a break as well. Before we get started properly, does anyone have any declaration of interest this morning? Oh, none that I can see. Okay, thank you very much. You should have the minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 9th of November. Does everyone have a copy of those? And any comments or questions arising from those? Well, I can see. I propose we accept them. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cowie.
Sorry, Chair, I couldn't get my hand up there. I had asked at the last Education Resource Committee for a bit more information on one of the items in the Summer Enhanced Provision Fund. It was to do with Regen FX, and I think it was the climbing wall and the skate park. I've never received any more information. I know you had said it was something we could do. It's just to see if we could actually get that minuted and maybe get the information to myself.
Sure. Okay, Councillor Cowie, we'll have a look back to it. It was around equipment from memory, wasn't it?
Yeah, they'd been given money to upgrade the equipment for use in the community, and I was just wanting a bit more information about how the community would access it. Would there be a charge? Blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Right.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We'll make sure that's noted. If there's nothing else, I propose we accept the minutes as accurate records.
Second, Chair.
Thanks very much, Peter. Okay, moving on to our monitoring items then, everyone's item 3 to 6 in your pack. First one is Revenue Budget Monitoring 2021-2022. And Louise Harvey is going to take us through this. Morning, Louise.
Good morning and thank you, Chair. I'll just give you an update on the standard revenue report for this period. So this is the third report presented to committee for the financial year 21-22, and it covers the period 1st of April through to the 31st of December, which is period 10 of our financial year. It also includes now an update on the resources probable outturn exercise, which includes our forecast for the financial year to the 31st of March, as well as the specific costs incurred in relation to the resources COVID response. So paragraph 4 on page 17 contains updated information on the Scottish Attainment Challenge Fund. And for PEF, we've got an annual budget for the year of 12.235 million. And we're now reporting spend and commitment to date as at the 31st of December of 7.792 million, with 4.443 million still to spend. And this includes all our known staffing commitments for the full financial year from April through to March 22. The 21-22 PEF funding is fully committed by schools to spend by the end of the academic year to June 22, and that's in line with the PEF guidance. We are estimating that we'll have a carry forward at the financial year end of 3.5 million, and this will be used in the period April to June of the next financial year for covering the academic year. It'll be transfers to reserves at the year end, and it will meet the spend and commitments in line with the school's improvement plans. Schools will, however, continue to maximise the spend this financial year where possible in line with these plans, and therefore this will be monitored across the financial year, and it will be the actual underspend at the year end that's carried forward. In relation to the SAC budget, we've got a budget this year of 1.971 million and spending commitment to date of 1.709 million, with 243,000 still to spend. And again, this includes all unknown staff costs to the end of March, and this is reflected within this committed position. Turning to the main financial implications of the report, paragraph 6.1 on page 18. We're now reporting the probable outturn exercise for the resource, as I've said, and this position is a reported overspend of 2,028,000, and this is after our proposed transfers to reserves of 7.295 million, and these reserves are outlined at the bottom of Appendix A on page 21. And I can update now, they were approved as part of the Council's overall outturn position at the Executive Committee last week. The forecast cost of COVID for the resource is 2,028,000, with expenditure included within this of 2,009,000 for the financial year, and this is outlined in Appendix B. The overspend related and reflects the cost of increased utilities due to the increased ventilation requirements within our schools and establishments, and the increased cost of placements for children with ASN. There's also loss of income of 79,000 and an underspend Our core budget for education is on track, and we're reporting a break-even position after the cost of COVID. There are, however, net position within this, and we've got a bit of an underspend within our early years core budget, and this is partially offset by an overspend relating to transport costs, both in mainstream and ASN, and also school placements, and these are demand-led services based on pupil numbers. We've got funding within the report of 9.658 million, and this includes the logistics funding and funding for CaO2 monitors. And additional to that, we've got the council investment money for education, learning and recovery. 903 million.
Sorry, Louise, I think we're having a few technical difficulties with your stream pausing. I'm not sure if you're able to hear us.
Looks like she's dropped out, Chair.
Yeah, is she appearing on the list?
I'm just checking, Chair. Hold on.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's still there. I'll put a wee message in the chat to her to see if she can see that.
Okay. Sorry for the delay, everyone. We'll just give it a second.
What I'll do is, oh, she's leaving. I'll try and resend an invite to her.
Right, that's great. Just give it a minute or so, everyone, and if we need to move on to capital budget monitoring and come back to revenue, we'll do that.
Chair, it's just saying it's still trying to contact Louise. I don't know if you want to move on and then go back to that one.
Right. Okay, great. Thanks, Tracy. Excuse me. Okay, everyone, we'll just move on to our next monitoring item and see how we go on in terms of finding a time to come back to item 3. So we're going on to item 4 just now, which is in capital budget monitoring 2021-2022. And Lorraine O'Hagan's going to take us through this. Good morning, Lorraine.
Morning, Chair. Good morning, Committee. Again, this is the third monitoring report for capital for the current year and takes us to the period 10 end date, which is the end of December 2021. Section 3 of your report provides a background to the programme and advises that the last time we reported to Education Committee back in November, we had a budget for the year of just shy of 18 million, 17.986 to be precise. Since that meeting, adjustments were approved by the Executive Committee in December last year and then again at last week's meeting. And these took the programme down by a net decrease of 2.787 million. These adjustments then take your overall programme for the current year to a figure of 15.199 million. And in effect, those exceptions that were approved were taking our budget to the level that we think will be achievable in terms of spend in this current year. So section 4 of your report details the capital programme update then for the current year with a breakdown in Appendix A of your report. So section 4.1 notes that the total capital programme for the resource for the current year is 15.119, as I mentioned. The anticipated spend to date is 10.023 million, with spend to the 31st of December amounting to 10.167. So at that point we were actually a little bit ahead of profile, and again it's really reflecting the timing of payment across a number of the projects, of which there are quite a number within the education resource. So I'll be looking just to refer Committee back to the recommendation in section 2 of your report and ask that Committee note the Education Resources budget of 15.199 million and spend to the 31st of December of 10.167 million. Thank you, Chair.
Great, Lorraine, thank you very much. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Lorraine on capital budget monitoring? And I can see, happy to accept the report.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, I believe Louise is back in the meeting just now, so we will go back to monitoring item 3 if possible. We were just nearing the end of that anyway at the summary. Can you hear us just now, Louise?
Yeah, I can. Apologies. I think I lost my internet connection there. I was just touching on one of the final parts around the learning recovery. So our learning recovery funding for the year is reported in Appendix B is 11.903 million. And this is the funding would receive both nationally and as part of the SLC investments to offset some of education's costs of COVID. There is specific grant that we're still holding centrally to cover just short of 3.3 million, and this is used to support the staff costs in the period of April to June next financial year, and also the continuation of some of our strategic programmes, and this is all committed in terms of the funding. In terms of our council strategic investment funding, this specifically is supporting the study support and the tutoring programmes, digital inclusion, as well as learning recovery staffing. And again, this will all be spent by the end of this financial year. Just reporting on our period 10 position as at the 31st of December, we are reporting an overspend of 1.151 million, and this is really just the proportionate costs of our COVID position after our proposed transfers to reserves, and detailed explanations are outlined in Appendix 2. We have our standard budget environments at the bottom of Appendix A, and these cover education's budget movements from the 10th of September through to the 31st of December, and really represent any transfers to reserves to meet our expenditure commitments, the creation of budget to reflect income that education has received, and just generally the activity as part of the devolved management scheme and our EMA payments. So if I can ask committee to refer back to paragraph 2, we're asked to approve the following recommendations: that a forecast overspend of at the 31st of March of 2.028 million after proposed transfers to reserves as detailed in Appendix Appendix A of the report is
Looks like she's gone again, Chair.
We were doing so well, weren't we?
Yeah.
We'll get there by the end of committee. I'm not sure if you can hear us just now, Louise. You've frozen again. Sure. She's still appearing on
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry about that. I was just going on to my phone. I think there's a problem with my internet. Sorry, it was just on the very last point that the overspend at the 31st of December is highlighted in Appendix A after the proposed transfers to reserve be noted and the proposed budget variants are approved.
Great, thank you very much, Louise. Sorry you've been having problems this morning. Any comments or questions? I've got Councillor Harrow, please.
Thanks, Chair. 6.1, it was really just mentioned by Louise there at the end. You've got an overspend of 2.028 million after transferring 7.295 million to reserves. Could you not just transfer 2.028 million less, and then you wouldn't have an overspend? Or is that just being simple?
Well, it's because the proposed transfers are a specific funding, so they're mostly around the PEF funding and the early year specific grants, so we can't mix those it's not core budget. And also we're also extracting the council's COVID position, which is the 2.028 million, so that have to be funded separately through other sources where education hasn't received the direct, after the direct learning recovery funding. So it's more to do with the fact that the carry forward of the 7.2 million is for specific reserves.
Right, okay, thanks very much. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor. Any further comments or questions? And I can see, okay, we're happy to accept the report.
Agreed, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks again, Louise, thank you. Okay, moving forward then, so we're on item 5, so I'll give you a second to get that in your packets on page 27. This is on workforce monitoring, and this is September to November of last year. And Elaine Maxwell's going to take us through this. Good morning, Lorraine. Sorry, I'm saying Lorraine because I'm reading the previous name. Elaine. My apologies, Elaine.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair. As you said, this is the Standard Employment Information Report for Education Resources covering the period September to November of 2021. And members will know that this is prepared by personnel. So just running through some of the key information contained within the report, you will see at section 4.1, it details the attendance information or attendance statistics for committee, and the key points to note in terms of education resources for November 2021, the absence percent was sitting at 6.7%, and that was in comparison to the council-wide figure of 6.9%. So we can see that that's an increase of 1.5 when compared to the previous month. And again, looking at the figures of last year, there is an increase of 1.2%. Members will know that we've started including what the COVID absence or the overall council absence rate at the time of the report being written, along with what the percentage is relating to COVID. And just an up-to-date position, as at just now, the council's council-wide absence level is sitting at 7.94%, with 2.9% related to COVID. And obviously members will appreciate that position changes on a daily basis depending on obviously confirmed cases, self-isolation, etc. Looking at the annual average figure for the resource for 21-22, it's 4.2%, and that's in comparison to the council-wide annual average of 5.2%. Moving on to section 4.2 to 4.5, which again the information can be found in Appendix 2. The main points to note during this period are that there were 610 occupational health referrals, and again you'll see that there's an increase across most of those referral points, and that's what we would expect to see given that there has been an increase in the absence levels. There were 6 disciplinary hearings, no grievances, and 1 dignity at work issue raised. There were 346 accidents and incidents recorded during the period, with 309 relating to physical incidents. There were 57 leavers with 53% completed exit interviews, which is quite a good percentage across for those who sit in some of the other committees that sometimes we don't get as good an input as that. Moving on to section 4.7, which details the vacant posts, again found in Appendix 2A. You'll see that during this period there were 102 employees left, with managers indicating that 117 posts were being filled, 3 posts were being held pending the outcome of a service review. And as that, I would refer committee back to section 2 and ask you approve the recommendation that the workforce monitoring information for the resource for the period September to November 2021 be noted. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Elaine. Thank you for the extra bits of information about COVID absence as well. Obviously, slightly strange times at the time this report had been put together. Any comments or questions on item 5 just now, colleagues? Councillor Harrow.
Sorry, me again. On 4.3, the accidents and incidents, I've shown a kind of more than 50% increase. Is there a reason for this, or is it maybe the way of reporting? Thanks.
I was going to give that additional information at the time of actually presenting the report, but had a wee note. Obviously, you'll know Eileen normally does this, and just if I'm asked. So I understand that there had been a delay in terms of accidents being input, Councillor Harrow. So actually, some of those figures will relate to accidents that haven't happened during that period. And certainly, I would normally attend some of the other resource committees. It has happened in one of the other resources as well. Fairly recently, where it's skewed the figures, so to speak. So that would reflect on why there's been an increase there.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Okay, Councillor, thanks. No further comments or questions. Happy to accept this report.
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Right, moving on to the last of our monitoring items just now. This is on the Education Resource Plan. This is Q2 Progress Report. So it runs from April 2020 to September 21. And Des Dixon is going to present this for us. Good morning, Des.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, Committee. Thank you. And as you say, the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the Education Resources Plan Q2 for the period the 1st of April 2020 through until the 30th of September 2021, which does seem some time ago, but is as per the Council's Improve and Performance Reporting Framework. Of course, the background for me will be many members of this committee are well aware of the impact of COVID that has had on our schools and services. But nevertheless, what did emerge was a real commitment by our elected members, our council services, our partner agencies, including our professional associations, and of course, and not least, our staff, to work together despite these challenges to keep education as a priority service and to deliver education of the highest quality for all learners. So this report shows in para 5 the progress that we made up until September 2021 using the colour-coded format to show the status against each of the measures showing in Appendix 2. In paragraph 5.2, we show the overall summary at that particular time on the progress made. And in paragraph 5.3, we'll highlight a range of key achievements at that particular time, and also noting that there were no red areas to highlight as confirmed in paragraph 5.4. So, Chair, maybe this morning it's just worth highlighting a small number of achievements in that report at that time, and clearly the continuation of ESOL online classes was still continuing, and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards was still continuing for a good variety of young people. And later on we'll hear Anne Donaldson give an update on community learning and development in her report later on this morning. And not least, the focus on still the positive destinations for young people, and at September 2021, the kick-in again of the Foundation Apprentice courses, which had been paused. And needless to say, the Summer Hub programme, which was very well received by families and young people, as this committee will remember. And of course, at that particular time, that was the start of the new 1140 hours with all their establishments up and opening. And that again has been well received by many families and parents. And of course, the Youth and Sustainability Forum is up and running following the exit contribution from Lynn and colleagues and members of this committee at COP26, just to give you a flavour. And of course, later on this morning, you'll hear Carol give an insight into numeracy and mathematics, and also into the learning, teaching and assessment progress made there as well. So there will be a progress report later this morning. So finally, Chair, we make reference in paragraph 5.5 and in Appendix 3 that we will report in Q4 at the end of the school year what the position is with regards to curriculum for excellence levels, which was paused by the Scottish Government in 2020 and then reconvened in June 2021. So that'll be a later report in Q4. So, Chair, this morning the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: that the Education Resources Plan at Q2 Progress Report, as summarised in paragraph 5.2 and attached as Appendix 2 of this report, be noted; that some of the key achievements made by the resource up until September 2021, as detailed in paragraph 5.3, be noted; that there are no areas for improvement highlighted, as in paragraph 5.4, and that this be noted; and that the additional scrutiny of reporting the updated status of those measures identified as report later at Q4, as summarised in paragraph 5.5 and detailed at Appendix 3 of this report, be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Des, for taking the time to go through that and pick out a few examples as well. As usual, a few short paragraphs in the body of the main report really can't capture the breadth of the work that has gone on, and what an incredibly busy time it has been over that period. Does anyone have any comments or questions just now? Councillor Harrow.
Surprise. On page 46 of the report, the Breakfast Club target is done as 3,000 and the actual is over 7,000. Is this considered a good or a bad thing? And how's the extra uptake of Breakfast Club being funded? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor.
Yes, Chair, I'll come back in there. Yeah, it is a very good thing to give you that. I think the success of the programme over the summer period, given the challenges that we faced with the hubs, etc., it was exceptional. And I think the work of our Youth, Family, Community Learning and other council resources helped to deliver a first-class service at fairly short notice. And then I think we can provide you with other information later on about the rollout of the breakfast clubs, as they have now restarted back in our schools, which again is a success story, and we could quantify that for you.
Right, thank you. I've got Lynn Sherry looking to come in as well. Morning, Lynn.
Morning. It was just to say the same thing, but Des
earlier,
just obviously that we used our kind of third sector organisation last summer, which really helped to kind of boost the numbers in a short time scale, as Des had said. And we can get more information. Breakfast clubs are almost all up and running now, so we should be able to supply some information about numbers and how that is going, given the kind of post-COVID move back into introducing that. So we can get that.
Great. Thank you very much, Lynn. You're looking for supplementary, Councillor? Not sure. I think Councillor Harrow still has his hand up. Well, has disappeared sideways from my screen. I'm not sure if anyone else is.
I think he's on the phone, Chair.
I think he is. Okay. Councillor Allison.
Yeah, just as a supplementary for Ian, the second part of the question was, how is this being funded? Obviously, we've budgeted in 3,000 breakfasts and we've provided over 7,000 already, which obviously has a budget implication. And how have we squared that circle?
I'll fight Lynn back in on that one, thank you.
I'm trying to put my hand up and down here at the same time. You'll know for a period of time we obviously weren't running breakfast clubs, so there would have been an underspend from that, part of the budget for that sort of period that there was an activity there. So we work with Central Finance just to make sure that they keep tabs on how much we're spending, what our budget is for the year and what we need. And we work closely with Finance in terms of trying to manage the overall budget position. So we do sort of track the ins and outs of what we need for breakfast clubs and the change, the kind of shift in position, because we've been open, closed. So we're monitoring that as one kind of unit and liaising with Finance. I don't have exact figures. I can get figures if you would want to see them, but that's...
Well, sorry, through you, Chair. Lynn, it wasn't so much the process. Yes, I can understand that you're always monitoring that and following figures, but the bottom line is that 3,000 breakfasts were budgeted for at whatever cost you do. We've supplied more than twice that number already. So yes, you can monitor it, but that doesn't mean to say that the funding would have been available. So where has the funding come from to supply these lunches? Have we fired it from some other budget? Has there been extra funding supplied? It's not figures I need, it's the movement of funding.
Yes, finances out there. Louise is there. I'm not sure if she would be able to add more to it. That in terms of managing the overall position, Louise kind of keeps control of the entire budget to try and fund overspends and underspend.
Yeah, if I can just come in, I'm sorry, I can't use my hand because I'm on my phone, but it was just the funding that was allocated as part of the original investment has been sufficient to cover the additionality. So because it was in over a few years and we had obviously the delayed start, etc., there was enough capacity within the year through the budget to fund the additionality. So that's already been budgeted for, and we're not seeing a pressure in that area this year.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Councillor. Just going to double check. I saw Tony McDade's hand flash up there, but then go back down. I wasn't sure if he's having an issue or if it was just a legacy.
Thanks, Chair. Lynn beat me to saying
right, okay.
Louise was going to come in probably.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Tony. Thank you. If there's any further information on that, looking for Councillor Allison, I'm sure we'll be able to provide it. And the bottom line is it's a good news story that more children have been able to access breakfast clubs at their local schools as well. Any further comments or questions on this one just now? Nope. Okay, happy to accept the report.
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. Right, we're moving on then. We have 3 items for decision this morning. First one is item 7. This is on the new devolved school management scheme, which is due to be implemented at the start of the financial year. And Stuart Nicholson is going to take us through this. Good morning, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Good morning, all. The purpose of this paper is to seek approval for the new devolved school management scheme, which is due to be implemented in schools from April 2022. As background, Section 3 of the paper notes that devolved school management, or DSM, schemes were introduced in 1993 as a means of delegating authority to schools to provide a bit more control in relation to the use of budgets and resources. And that guidance has been periodically reviewed ever since. The latest guidelines were published in 2019 and they were based on the principles noted in Section 4 of the paper. Those guidelines were due to be implemented from April 2021, but that date was delayed as a result of the disruption due to COVID. Section 5 sets out the process that we followed. A primary and a secondary working group were each convened to carry out the review as per the terms in para 5.3, each group having head teacher representation, union representation, as well as colleagues from personnel services, education and finance who took the lead. These groups were established in October of 2019, but had only met a couple of times each when work halted in March 2020. That work resumed again in April of 2021, working towards the revised target date of April 2022. So the review outcomes are listed in Section 6 of the paper. The agreements included the allocation and management of school budgets, including what should be controllable by the school and what would not. The efficient allocation of core staffing, a review of the schemes for providing absence cover, and we looked at rationalising the budget lines as well to achieve transparency. We also considered consultation models for school level, including the introduction of participatory budgeting and clarification around roles and responsibilities. Para 610 notes that the document will need to be reviewed and updated regularly, and particularly given the changes likely to come along under the terms of the education reform agenda. So the resulting DMS document, a late proof of the publication is attached as an appendix. You'll see that it's a comprehensive document that provides not only the agreed principles, but some of the underpinning advice too that head teachers require in order to effectively run their schools. I would note that this is an example of very effective collaborative working, and recognise the positive contributions to this document from head teachers and indeed from our teacher professional associations. With that, I'd refer committee to the recommendation in Section 2 and ask for approval for the devolved management scheme for schools as set out in the attachment as Appendix 1 for implementation from 1st April 2022 in line with the national framework and guidance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Are there any comments or questions on this? Councillor Fagan.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about 6.9 of the attachment, the appendix, which is about participatory budgeting. And I want to raise this issue just because it's an issue I raised at the area committee when we receive our reports on it. but it's really the kind of the overall policy. I just have a kind of query about. So we set aside 5% of the PEF allocation for participatory budgeting purposes. And obviously, as this is PEF funding, it's there for a very distinct purpose that is separate from general education expenditure. And so it will still have to comply with all and it sets that out in the paper. It will still have to comply with all the procedures and all the purposes for which PEF is there for and is intended to do. I'm just wondering about the whether we have any concerns about a conflict between the general school community, or however you want to put that, between participatory budgeting, a more general kind of framework applying to funding that exists for a very specific purpose, which is obviously to address the equity gap, and to what extent is South Lanarkshire Council an outlier in doing that, or is that a practice that is representative of local government as a whole, or are there other councils that have chosen to take a different approach? And are there any kind of conflicts that have sort of come to the resources attention, or potential conflicts that you're mindful of, that we have to find a way of resolving or preventing in future?
Thanks, Councillor Fagan. You're right, PEF funding has a very specific remit, and I think schools have been working with their own equity team to ensure that the parameters, if you like, around the participatory budgeting spend are set so that choices and decisions are taken within the context of that wider purpose. So we're very clear and very mindful of the fact that that needs to happen. The work that's been done in South Lanarkshire, I don't have detail of where other local authorities are, but I know that the equity team and our head teachers have been very much committed to progressing this agenda, and I'd be surprised if there was anywhere who are much further ahead than we are in terms of how this has been progressed and taken forward. And you're right, we just need to be mindful of the checks and balances that go along with this, and it's been made clear to young people along with the, I suppose, the authority also comes with the responsibility to use the money well and to use it responsibly.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, Councillor. Okay, thank you. Certainly, I've seen it from both points of view. I think you would say, as a parent who's been involved and consulted by two South Lanarkshire schools as well, and been involved in that process. And there is very much, a lot of sort of supportive work that has been around that, and my children have been involved as well. An area of development. Thanks for that answer, Stuart. I've got Councillor Nayland and then Councillor Allison. We'll start with Councillor Nayland.
Thank you, Chair. It's kind of a slightly different tangent to the question posed by Councillor Fagan. I'm looking at paragraph 6.8, setting out how head teachers will consult with stakeholder groups, etc. Can I ask further down the line, if the consultation takes place and the head teacher does not agree with the feedback that they get, who has overall decision making on how budgets are spent? Can the head teacher overrule all the stakeholders, or is there some sort of mechanism in place for mediation if things go wrong? Thank you.
I would like to think that we would not find ourselves in a situation where the views of the head teacher were significantly different to the views of the school community, and I refer back maybe to the earlier answer where the parameters for spend are discussed and negotiated and agreed, so that they fit within the general criteria or fit within the terms of the improvement plan and the priorities therein. If push came to shove, I think we would want to find a solution by discussion and negotiation rather than simply saying somebody has a final call. Ultimately, head teachers are accountable for the financial management, the financial regulation, but I think we would work very, very hard to avoid a situation where we found ourselves in a direct situation where there was a conflict between the head teacher and the remainder of the school community. The starting point of this is for establishing a clear sense of vision, a clear sense of shared purpose, and one would expect, or one would hope, that within that context we would reach a good decision by consultation rather than by a final call being imposed.
Stuart. Okay, Councillor. We'll move on to Councillor Allison.
Thanks, Chair. Quickly going back to where Joe was on the PEF money, etc., and participatory budgeting. The level of PEF funding within schools varies significantly for obvious reasons. That therefore means that the level of participatory budgeting within the school community is significantly different. Are we looking at any other ways of providing participatory budgeting for those schools that do not have a significant PEF budget? And secondly, one of the things you've mentioned, Stuart, was the looking at the absence cover, etc., regarding this. But and I apologise if I've missed it, but I couldn't see any outcome from that discussion in the report. And I think there is, again, a significant difference throughout South Lanarkshire as to how that is working. Has there been anything in this that helps areas where absence cover, they're perhaps struggling to get it as easily as maybe some of the other areas in the council are?
Thanks, Councillor. In terms of the absence cover part, in the report itself, page 101 of the pack, there's a discussion about the area covered in primary and secondary and ESN and some of the permanent funding in there. And there is also a discussion through the year over the additional staffing that we put in each of our secondary schools, which was run as a pilot for some time as the absence cover scheme, which has been discussed and rationalised. And that was a piece of work that was undertaken in consultation with head teachers, but also with the professional associations. So if you like, the variability around cover, the difficulty we've got just now is actually accessing people rather than budgets or structures or systems for allocating cover. So we are under significant pressures just with the ongoing level of absences. You heard Elaine talk earlier on of absence levels around about 7%, whereas normally we run about 4.5% to 5%, sometimes lower than that. So there's a distinction between those two parts, but the mechanisms we now have in place and agreed in terms of the area cover programme and in terms of the absence cover scheme in secondary schools are now reviewed and embedded. One of the things that we have in the absence cover scheme is we're mindful of the difficulty sometimes for our rural schools in accessing cover, so we'd put in a small additionality in those schools anyway, as if you like, a first line of defence before we get into the position of having to move teachers around from that point of view. As far as the question around the proportion of PEF funding, you're absolutely right. There is significant variability across the authority. For the time being, the ECHO team are focusing on PEF and PEF spending, and I would agree that there is a difference there. I think as we progress, we will consider other areas where participatory budgeting can be included or involved, but for the time being, I would acknowledge the point that you make.
Thanks, Stuart. I just comment. Thanks, Stuart, on the second part. In the first bit of absence cover, I had read that page, but your additional information on what was happening in the rural area, which is where my concerns were, addressed that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And it'd be right to say as well, Stuart, that, and councillors will know this from PEF reports they've had to area committee, that schools are choosing to allocate or use different percentages as well in terms of their PEF money, in terms of what is up for participatory budgeting. So there's that difference as well at the moment. Okay, I'll take Councillor Harrow just now, please.
Yes, we thought it was safe. On page 90, there's a maximum class size given for primary school, but there's nothing for secondary school classes. Is there a reason for this? Thanks.
There's no change at all to the secondary maxima, which are class sizes of 33 in S1 and S2 and 30s from S3 up the way, so that has not been included there. It's something we might consider just putting in as a final appendix here.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Stuart. I can't see any further hands up. This is an item for decisions, so I propose we accept the recommendations at section 2.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. Agreed?
Agreed.
Good, thank you everyone. Right, move on. Second item for decision today, it's Stuart's presenting this again, and this is on the continuation and development of the current MCR Pathways programme. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks again, Chair. So the purpose of this paper is to seek approval for the proposed continuation and the development of the current MCR Pathways programme. Section 3 notes that the initial phase of this mentoring and support programme for some of our more vulnerable young people was established in 6 of our schools in 2019. As noted in Para 3.1, we employed 6 Pathways coordinators, that's 1 per school, to deliver that programme, and that initial phase was due to finish at the end of December past. As we've noted in Section 4, the next phase introduces the programme in 3 further schools with the need to bring in 3 further Pathways coordinators. Section 5 of the paper refers to the impact report, which is attached as an appendix, as well as including some statistics. There are some quotes and case studies in there which really give a sense of the value of the programme. There's a story of a young carer, the story of a young person who was struggling having just moved to Scotland as a result of changes in family circumstances, and another one about a young person at risk of disengaging. And each of those show the individual benefits and the very much the positive impact of the programme at an individual level. In order to progress with the expansion of the programme, Section 8 proposes that we make the existing Pathway Coordinator posts permanent, that's the table in 8.1, and then that we add the 3 new posts for a fixed term of 18 months initially, and that's in table 8.2. Section 9 sets out the cost of those posts, which will be met from Attainment Challenge funding, and Para 9.3 notes that the additional administration costs of £28,000 per school, which we had to pay for previously, is now going to be paid by Scottish Government. So all 9 of those schools will benefit from that. I'd refer committee back to Section 2 of the report and ask for approval for the recommendations that the 6 FTE MCR Pathways Coordinator posts be made permanent as detailed in Para 8.1, and that the 3 further MCR Pathways Coordinator posts be added to the establishment, fixed term for 18 months as detailed in Para 8.2. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, first time today, muted. Any comments or questions on this report? Oh, I can't see any. Thank you for taking us through that, Stuart, and for the addition of the case studies as well. So it really adds a bit of colour and context to reports like this as well. It's very helpful. If there's no further comments, I suggest that we accept the recommendations at Section 2, the item.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay. Right. Thanks, everyone. We're on to our third item for decision. This is item 9 on your pack, and this is a proposal to cease charging for privileged transport places on mainstream school transport. And Lynn Sherry's going to take us through this. Thank you, Lynn.
Okay. Thank you very much. Morning, everyone. Really, just to let you know, the purpose of this report is to inform committee on the outcome of forthcoming changes in legislation that essentially will prohibit charging for privileged transport places, which is on our mainstream school transport currently. Just in terms of background, as you'll know, paid privilege is allocated out every year where we have dedicated school transport contracts and dedicated vehicles where we may have spare capacity. So we introduced that a number of years ago, to 2010, and introduced a charge of, at that point, it was £1 a day. Currently, it works out just over £200 a year, but we have a small number of people who now apply and there is space available, and it brings in a very modest level of income of about £12,000 a year. So it's not a lot. Paragraph 3 and paragraph 3.4 just mention that we've moved through and enhanced our priorities list, if you like. We introduced a priority 3 for those who were in free school meals, and then the year after that we enhanced that to see where you had free school meals, you would actually get the privileged place free of charge. The change that's come about is really looking at paragraph or section 4 and then section 5, paragraph 4.1. Really what we're saying is that there's new regulations coming in, which means that buses and coaches which carry passengers on local and scheduled routes, that they have to have disabled access, and that would take effect from December 21. It had a knock-on effect that the regulations also said that if this bus or coach provider doesn't incorporate these features to allow for disabled access, then we couldn't actually charge for any spaces that we allocate out. You weren't allowed to charge an individual charge to individuals for paid privileged transport, so that would have to stop and we could no longer levy a charge. The impact of that was that some of the vehicles out there may move on to becoming more disabled access compliant if they run service routes, for example, and others may not. And it meant that we could find ourselves in education being in an inconsistent approach, kind of taking an inconsistent approach where some families would be charged for privileged transport and others wouldn't, and would be able to access it free. Just because of the vehicle they were being transported to and from school. So it kind of didn't make sense. When we heard that these regulations were coming into place from December 21, our original proposal, as we've said in section 6, is that we would ask that privileged transport charges would stop from the 31st of December, and as of this term we would no longer levy a charge. There has been a decision taken to defer the changes in regulations, and they won't actually come into effect until July of 22. But we felt there was 2 reasons why we felt we should still come to committee and ask for the wiping of privileged transport and the levy of a fee. And it was 2 things really, that it felt that the timing of it was right with the introduction of the under 22's free bus pass scheme, that you can go on mainstream transport free of charge if you're entitled. You can now get on a bus free of charge with your new bus pass. But there was this thing lying in the middle that if it was privileged transport, you would have to pay for it. And it just didn't seem to make sense at this moment in time. And also that we felt it might assist families who are continuing to face financial challenges due to the continued kind of impact of the pandemic. So for those 2 reasons, we felt it was still an opportune time to put a request to Education Committee to ask that we essentially remove the charging for privileged transport. We would still offer privilege free of charge if there was spaces on buses, but we would no longer make that charge for it. And if you were to endorse that today, we're asking as part of the recommendations that it would move to Exec Committee from Education for approval to amend the policy as such.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Any comments or questions on this, anyone? Councillor Mars?
Thank you, Chair. I'd be very much in favour of this move. I'm very pleased to see this report. As Lynn has already outlined, this is in line with the free school transport, free bus transport for under 22s. It meets and is in line with SLC priorities for privileged places for those most in need, and doing this 6 months earlier than would regulatorily be required, I think fits with the Council's priority to help those most in need, and especially at a time where the cost of living is rising.
Thanks very much for your comments, Councillor. Thank you. There's no further comments or questions. I propose we accept the recommendations at 2.
I'll second that, Chair.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. That's the end of our items for decision. We're on to items for noting. First one is item 10 on your pack, and this is a general update on the implementation of the new Scottish Child Disability Payment Scheme, CDP. And Lynn is going to take us through this as well. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you again. Just to give you some general information, we thought we should bring this to Education Resources Committee in terms of the input that education might be asked in its part in supporting anyone who puts forward an application for the new child disability payment. So Child Disability Living Allowance was previously coordinated through DWP, and that has been replaced by this new benefit, which is called the Scottish Child Disability Payment. That happened in November last year, following 3 pilots in other local authorities. So what will happen now is those who are on Child Disability Living Allowance currently, they don't need to do anything. The benefit will slide over into the new benefit in the course of the next year, but any new applications will have to come through the Child Disability Payment, and that will be coordinated through Social Security Scotland as opposed to DWP. As part of this sort of national policy decision, there was a view taken that in order to help parents and carers with applications and to reduce the burden on them, that there would be the option for parents and carers to request Social Security Scotland to go out on behalf of them and collect information from certain parties that would support their application. So that involves health, so it could be GP practices, it could be health boards, and it could also be local authorities. So it meant that we might be looking for information maybe coming from a class teacher, or a head teacher, a special support teacher, a psychologist. It could be anyone who's named either individually or collectively by a parent as someone who could help support the application that they're putting in for the child, to help provide Social Security Scotland with information about the child's disability, about how it impacts on their learning and what supports they need, etc. So it was a positive thing to try and support the application. It did need an agreed sort of process and a sharing of information. So there's been an agreed standard process. A national portal has been set up. We have a data sharing agreement with all of the parties, etc. So that we will receive confidential information out and will disseminate that around education, gather all the relevant information and submit it back onto the national portal so that Social Security Scotland can then make a decision on the application. So that essentially is it. There's a recognition that we will now have a part to play, maybe more than we have done in the past. We have had some additional funding being awarded to education resources. The amount of applications that we've had so far has been very low. So the purpose of the paper is just to let you know of the changes, to let you know that we're managing that at the moment. But as applications are expected to increase, that we would be requesting that there would be an admin increased, also needed within our central admin team. And the purpose of the paper is really just to make the committee aware of the changes, to note that we have been given an allocation of 248,000 into our budget, and that as and when we may require, we have agreement to increase our staffing accordingly to support the process and ultimately help parents and carers with their application, hopefully to a successful conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Any comments and questions on this report for Lynn? Can't see any just now. Happy to accept. Great. Okay. Thanks very much for that, Lynn. Thanks, Councillor. Okay, moving on to next item for voting is item 11. This is on current developments and successes around learning, teaching and assessment within the resource. And Carol's going to take us through this. Good morning, Carol.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Committee. So the purpose of this report is to provide members with an update on developments which fall under the umbrella term of learning, teaching and assessment. This is arguably the most important tool we have in our quest to provide the highest quality educational experiences in our schools. Section 3 provides background and details around the context of this report and its importance within both the local and national landscape. While Section 4 describes our strategy for this school session, which is overall to build on existing support and to strengthen our guidance for teachers and for schools. So Section 4.3 outlines how this will be done. An interactive toolkit which helps our teachers focus on 9 features of highly effective practice has been created. And the 9 features are based on current educational thinking and research and are listed in the report as sharing learning intentions and criteria for success, the structure of a lesson, a range of group and individual tasks, spotlight on skills, differentiation, metacognition and self-regulation, a range of assessment strategies and effective questioning. And anyone with a teaching background within the room will recognise these as being the linchpins of what makes effective practice in the classroom. So each of these strategies is being exemplified and supported by a range of resources and training materials which will be made available to all staff to access as part of their continued professional development. 5 of these elements have already been completed and are available for use, with the intention that the other 4 will be ready by the end of this school session. And initial feedback from our teachers has been overwhelmingly positive. Moving on to Section 4.4, it details another strand in our approach, and this time in terms of building on what is known as play pedagogy. So again, research tells us that for our very youngest learners within early year settings and in the early stages of primary school, that they benefit greatly from this approach to learning. And there are several initiatives currently underway to support our teachers to deliver high quality play experiences. These include staff from our schools working with experts from Strathclyde University and the development of play champions who, through the training that's provided, can lead and advise others within their own learning communities. Section 4.5 goes on to describe another highly successful programme, Access Through the Work of the West Partnership, and this is called Improving Our Classrooms. And this involves class teachers volunteering to undertake a master's level course and a case study which impacts directly on their classroom practice. And again, this has been a hugely popular and successful programme, and this section also details plans for rolling this out and extending its reach. Moving on to section 4.6, another important strand is our work to support and strengthen practice within outdoor learning. And this has resulted in us producing updated guidelines and a new website to support our schools in maximising the use of their natural environments for learning. And our members will be aware that, during the period of COVID restrictions and some of the mitigations that have been in place, in some way this has pushed the agenda of outdoor learning forward faster, which has been a good thing for our schools as they've turned increasingly to different ways to deliver their learning. And we were keen to capitalise on this and to support our schools moving forward with this agenda. And finally, section 5 talks about next steps and the measures we have put in place for consultation with our schools. Overall, members will note that this strategy has been designed to support our most valuable resource, which is our classroom teachers. And without their ongoing dedication, skill and expertise during the pandemic and beyond, we would not be achieving the kind of results we do. So I'd like to put it on record today that this is designed directly to support practitioners within the classroom. So therefore, Chair, Committee is asked to approve the recommendation in section 2.1 that this progress with regards to our learning, teaching and assessment strategy be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Carol, for taking us through that. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this report just now? Councillor Allison.
My usual one for Tony to answer. Very good report, highlights the excellence of our staff, facilities, etc. But in international terms, the output, which is an important thing from our schools, in international terms has declined over the last 15 years or so. Do you expect the things you've highlighted here to at least arrest that decline, to get us back to where we were in the past and allow the good work being done in schools to be reflected in the outcomes comparative to other countries?
Oh, I see Tony's come in.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair, as well. Thanks, Councillor Allison. I would have been disappointed had you not mentioned that, but we do seem to have that ongoing. We do disagree. That you're quite right around some of the international comparisons, but you will see that there's been the nature of those international surveys about how they link to the work that we've done. I think I answer from a South Lanarkshire perspective. We're in a fortunate position in that we hold our own against authorities from a national perspective, and we can see that at class level, at school level and as an authority level. I do think that you're quite right, though, that the commitment to professional learning is significant, and I think that is the way to make sure that our children and young people benefit most, is by having effective a commitment to skilling up teachers to be as focused as possible around learning and teaching. So there's no doubt. I do still think that we do compare well internationally as well, but there is always room for improvement.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, Alec. Councillor Harrow.
On page 159, section 3.4, I'm surprised that assessment is seen as almost being treated as a separate entity. Surely you can't assess until you're aware of what you've taught and whether the kids have actually taken on board some learning. I know that when I was back in the day, when I was in the chalk face, you were kind of aware of the assessment that was kind of sort of coming up while you were teaching. I'm not saying we taught to the assessment, I just thought, but surely they are integrated in that, good teachers, of which we probably get a lot, will have that in their mind. Thanks.
Sorry, I clicked off there. Did you have your hands up, Carol?
I did. Apologies.
Sorry, I was reading the paper.
Yeah. Yeah, Councillor Harrow, I think you made an excellent point, and I absolutely agree with you. I think over recent years it has been a changing landscape in terms of assessment, and that has maybe, a number of years ago, pushed the system to look at assessment as almost a bolt-on activity in some regards. And this is absolutely a strategy to get assessment back into the core of learning and teaching, and absolutely not being seen as something that happens at the end. Children should be aware right from the beginning, as you rightly point out, of what they're going to be assessed on, what the criteria is. And I don't think we've entirely lost that, but I think over recent years there's perhaps been a shift to looking at assessment as a thing in itself, and we need to get back to making sure it's integrated as part of the high quality learning and teaching experience. So I would absolutely agree with the point that you make, and this strategy is pushing forward that agenda.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Carol, and thanks, Councillor. Very interesting, and I would agree with both of your assessments there as well. I think everything comes in cycles, doesn't it? And it's sort of back to the ideas that I remember being taught about formative assessment, sharing learning outcomes right at the start of a lesson and the start of the topic is something that's integral to the process. Interesting discussion. Thank you. If there's nothing further on this, are we happy to accept the report as is?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on then to item 12, which is also, Carol's going to take us through this, and this is specifically a numeracy and mathematics update. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Chair. And this again links. I've got 3 papers today that hopefully provide a bit of a story as they link together. This one's focused on numeracy and mathematics and the work that the Curriculum Quality Improvement Service are doing to ensure that both methodology and, as Councillor Allison referred to, results are continuing to improve within this area. So this is to provide members with an update on these developments. So it's a brief report, and Section 3 gives some important background information about the national and local landscape in terms of numeracy. It highlights that our schools have identified numeracy as one of the key areas for focusing on the recovery work. And it is also worth highlighting at this point that the information around numeracy contained within this paper will dovetail with what you're about to hear as part of agenda item 14, which I'll be presenting shortly, on equity and the continued efforts to close the poverty-related attainment gap, which does provide evidence that recovery in numeracy should be made a priority. So Section 4 gives details around our recovery strategy and the identification of a programme which we wanted to adopt to enhance the teaching further of numeracy and mathematics, and again based on current research and good practice. And the programme that was identified is known as the Maths Recovery Training, and as Section 4.4 details, is a methodology for teaching the subject that focuses on careful assessment and identification of any difficulties early within the subject, followed by a structured programme of interventions. This programme is already being used within a number of our schools, and as Section 4.9 states, has led to the biggest improvements in attainment. However, until now, we have relied on purchasing training from Maths Recovery accredited trainers, and given the financial implications ongoing from this, has meant that the speed of rollout has been slower than we would have liked. So therefore, as Section 4 explains, the plan is to speed up the delivery of this programme by focusing our available resources on training our own teachers, who will then allow a number of them to become accredited trainers themselves for other teachers within South Lanarkshire Council. And this means ultimately the programme will become self-sustaining and has a far greater reach than the current model of relying on external trainers. So as Section 4.10 states, the ambition is to have all appropriate staff trained within a 5-year period and to have all establishments using this tried and tested approach. Attainment will be closely monitored to ensure it is having the desired impact, and staff will continue to be involved and consulted. And the programme is being led by our lead officer for numeracy, who sits in the National Response to Improving Mathematics Board, the NRIM board, I think it said, and a board which is actually chaired by Stuart Nicholson, as detailed in section 3.5. Therefore, Chair, Committee is asked to approve the recommendation in section 2.1 that the strategy for recovery in numeracy and mathematics be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Carol. Councillor Harrow.
Thanks, Chair. As somebody that did teach sort of numbers subjects, I think it's incredibly important that we do teach arithmetic and maths well in primary schools, because the number of kids I had when they came up, and as soon as they saw a number, whether it was a page number or anything, they just almost melted down. I can't do this. I'm no use at maths. And it wasn't maths. It was arithmetic, although we don't do that anymore. And I think we've got to get that into their head in primary school so that they've got a bit more confidence when they go up to the big school sort of thing. And just as an aside, I think the worst thing that we ever did was get rid of arithmetic as a separate subject, because there are kids that won't be able to go on and do sines and cosines and whatever at secondary, but they need a grounding and an understanding of numbers. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further comments or questions on this? Can't see any just now. Thank you very much for the update, Carol. I had an interesting chat at a parent council last week on what they're taking forward and some of the differences that they've noticed post-pandemic, and how, just touching on what Councillor Harrow said, really going back to basics in a lot of ways. And they were using PEF money to invest in concrete materials, so cubes and rods and so on, which really interesting to see. And they were talking about the difference between what it was possible to do on a screen and what worked really well during lockdown, and other things that you really need to be able to physically sit and count concrete materials. Sorry, I'm going off on one. I'll bring in Councillor Walker because she's sitting with her hands up. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was just to say it's really a good report, but just to sort of highlight the attainment gap and how that's related to tackling poverty. And the report that went from the Tackling Poverty group to the exec was one of the recommendations was very much focused on getting more streamlined information about impact and outcomes. So I think the work in relation to this would be very, very informative and useful for however the Tackling Poverty group continues, that is also kind of reported on a quarterly basis in terms of the outcomes and the impact that it's having, because it obviously is very significant in relation to tackling the poverty group. So hopefully that will feed in the future to the evaluation and performance stuff that the Tackling Poverty group, as it moves on, will hopefully provide recommendations for future targeting of resources. So I think the report and the work will be very useful and informative in that regard. And I would expect, obviously, there will be kind of evaluation reports coming back to this committee as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not sure if you were maybe there commenting on Carol's next report on equity. We have an equity update on closing the poverty-related attainment gap coming on at item 14, so we'll have that coming shortly. Carol, were you want to come in and say anything else there, or was it just that? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. If we're happy to accept this report just now, we'll move on.
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. So we're on to item 13 just now, and this is on the Community Learning and Development Strategic 3-Year Plan, which runs from 2021 to 2024, and this is a report on the draft which has been produced, which Anne Donaldson is going to present for us. Hello, Anne.
Hi there, good morning everyone. Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update of progress made in the review and drafting of the CLD 3-Year Plan for 21 to 24, and to seek continued support to achieve the vision of improve the quality of life for people in South Lanarkshire by offering vibrant learning and development opportunities that lead to personal development and community empowerment, and the plan is included as an appendix. Section 3 sets the background for the report, and paragraph 3.1 describes how all local authorities have a statutory obligation to produce a 3-year CLD plan as set out in the legislation, which is known as the CLD regulations. The plan must specify how the Education Authority will coordinate provision with statutory and other providers, what action the Education Authority will take to provide CLD over the 3-year period, what action other persons will take to provide CLD over this period, and also specify any unmet need. And paragraph 3.3 describes how the plan must also articulate identified target groups and individuals, have regard for their needs, identify barriers for these groups, and detail the consultation which has taken place with people who are representative of the target individuals and groups. I'd ask members to note, as stated in paragraph 3.5, that the plan fully puts in place the CLD Partnerships commitment to the shared vision to improve the quality of life for people in South Lanarkshire by offering vibrant learning and development opportunities that lead to personal development and community empowerment, and to deliver positive outcomes. Section 4 details the findings of stakeholder consultation and literature review, leading to identification of the themes listed in paragraph 4.2. These themes are progression, mental health, environmentalism, and access to learning for people with disabilities. Section 5 and paragraph 5.2 detail the actions and impact measures that will be taken against the priorities of access to learning, health and wellbeing, progression, employability, and community influence. And these impact measures will form the baseline of the data collection activity, and information about learners engaging in interventions will be collated on a 6-monthly basis and progress measured, and SMART targets formulated from this information to move forward. Section 6 describes the governance arrangements which have been agreed by the CLD partnership, and these arrangements include at least 4 meetings per year of the strategic partnership, local action planning groups to continue across the 4 localities, at least 2 network events per year to enable frontline staff to network with partners, a local plan that takes full account of local needs and priorities, a consistent approach to measurement of impact, and publication of achievements on an annual basis. Moving to Section 7 then, Section 7 describes areas of unmet need which have been recognised by the partnership as requiring greater attention and more intensive support, and these include the mental health and wellbeing needs of communities, the needs of learners requiring English for Speakers of Other Languages programmes, and the continuing challenge of digital access. Section 8 describes the ways in which the partnership will support workforce development to enable the workforce to be as well equipped as possible to meet the needs of learners and communities. Turning back then to Section 2 and the recommendations, the committee is asked to approve the following recommendations: to support and endorse the overarching ambitions of the CLD 3-year strategic plan 21 to 24, to note the actions and measures set out to secure improvement in the quality of life for the people of South Lanarkshire, to note the revised governance arrangements for annual planning and reporting, and to note the continued commitment to communities by South Lanarkshire and its partners through the work of the South Lanarkshire Community Learning and Development Partnership. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne, for going through that. Any comments or questions on this report just now, colleagues? Nope, I can't see any. Well, at the risk, I'm not going to sit and read out the entire preface, but I would like to make the point again that the strength of the partnership and the resilience that it's shown over the past few years has really been admirable, and I'm very pleased to see that the draft coming forward with the ambition and the commitment that's in there to continue over the next couple of years. Thank you very much, Anne. If there's no further comments, are we happy to accept? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, it was agreed, sorry. I thought someone wasn't sure what that was. Thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on to item 14, which is an equity update. Carol's going to take us through this, and this is an update on developments in supporting schools to close the poverty-related attainment gap, as I said before. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide members with an update on developments in supporting schools in their efforts to close the poverty-related attainment gap, and also to provide an update members on the upcoming changes to the Scottish Attainment Challenge, known as SAC funding model. And I appreciate this is a fairly lengthy paper which covers a number of interrelated topics, and I'll do my best to stick to the highlights, and of course happy to answer any questions at the end. So firstly, section 3 gives some background information about poverty within our schools and how we measure this. It is important for members to note that there's not one universally agreed way to measure this. And here in South Lanarkshire, we do try to take a holistic approach which allows schools to use data, but also leaves room for individual family circumstances that may not be reflected in data or postcodes, especially in rural areas, and especially as many families may be facing additional difficulties post-COVID. Section 4 gives a comprehensive overview of the funding landscape and also provides details around a change of national policy. As sections 4.1 to 4.3 set out, almost all our schools will continue to receive and will have full decision-making powers around the pupil equity funding monies that they receive directly from the Scottish Government, and this is known as PEF funding. School-by-school allocations are based on the number of pupils in receipt of free school meals, and there is no change to these arrangements going forward. Schools at the moment are waiting to receive note of their PEF allocation for next year, and that is expected very soon. However, as section 4.4 details, there has been a change with regarding the other funding source up until this point known as the Schools Programme. This programme historically identified 20 of our schools to receive additional funding, again direct from Scottish Government, with bids, plans and evaluations going straight to Scottish Government, who award money on a grant basis. And from April 2022, this schools programme, as it has been called, will come to an end. And it will be replaced by a different funding model which gives all 32 local authorities a share of money which will be allocated at the centre rather than to individual schools. And obviously that will mean a reduction in direct funding for the 20 original schools, but on the other hand will ensure that all of our schools benefit from carefully planned central projects. To ensure a smooth transition, we will continue to support all 20 SAC schools with their existing commitments between April and June as they work towards implementing their exit plans. Going forward, in terms of this new funding, a consultative group is being established in order to plan the best use of this new funding. So HT representatives, and they've been drawn from both our existing SAC schools, as they were, and non-SAC schools, as well as central staff and trade unions will form a group so that plan spend is done in a consultative and collaborative way. Section 5 returns to the PEF agenda, but this time focuses in on the success that has been our strategy towards participatory budgeting, and I know that was subject to a question earlier. And to help fulfil the Council's commitment to PB, all schools were asked to commit 5% of their PEF monies to this approach. And as a result, schools have creatively involved their parents and pupils in this element of the spend. Our equity team at the centre have supported them throughout this process, providing both support and challenge. And as members will know, Appendix 1 gives one of the many graphical illustrations of the outcome of a PB process from one of our schools, and that's Lanark Grammar, but there are many more. And members will also no doubt be aware that each area committee receives a PB update quarterly. Moving on to section 6 and the accompanying appendices 2 and 3, these provide some details of our successes and challenges around closing the poverty-related attainment gap. And as stated previously, there is no one defined way to measure the gap. However, locally and nationally, the assessment evidence that's used for measuring the gap is historically the achievement of a level data that is collected annually for schools for literacy and numeracy at the stages P1, P4, P7 and S3. There have been a number of issues with this approach during COVID, as no data at all was collected or gathered from schools in session 1920. However, working with the data that we do have, members will see that as detailed in Appendix 2, using our internal measure of learners living in either SIMD 1 and 2, plus those in receipt of free school meals versus other learners, the gap has steadily and consistently closed in literacy. However, over the period of lockdown, it has widened slightly in numeracy, and that goes back to my previous paper. And we have looked and asked ourselves as a resource why this might be, and there isn't one definitive answer. A possible suggestion that has been discussed with our schools is that over the periods of lockdown, when pupils were working at home, support available in the home environment was possibly stronger for literacy. And as a parent who regularly struggled more with numeracy homework, I'm sure some of the parents in here can relate to that. But regardless of the cause, it has been noted, and members will note from the paper 12 I've just presented that the details of action were taken to remedy this. Appendix 3 illustrates the national measure of pupils, and the national measure of pupils in terms of closing the gap compares the lowest fifth quintile of SIMD directly compared to pupils in the most affluent quintile, the top quintile. And this is a published measure contained in the local government benchmarking framework. Members should note that these measures using these members were performing very strongly against other local authorities, coming out for both literacy and numeracy as the 8th highest performing council out of 32. However, we are aiming for the 1st, not the 8th, so we need to continue with our work. Section 7 of this report provides details of the ongoing work we are doing to ensure that the cost of the school day agenda remains a high profile ask for all our schools to ensure that no child is left disadvantaged by financial circumstances in terms of accessing the curriculum. And work on this in our schools has been picked up nationally, with a number of our schools featuring on a national training resource. Section 8 widens out further to reflect the wider anti-poverty agenda and gives details of some projects that have been going on, that have happened or are ongoing to ensure the maximum support for children and their families. And finally, Section 9 details some next steps for the equity team. Equity has been and remains a huge focus for us, both at the centre but in each and every one of our schools. So thank you for your attention. I realise it's a long report, and Chair, Committee is asked to approve the recommendation in section 2.1 that the progress made with the Education Resources Equity Strategy in terms of closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and that the revised policy for allocating Scottish Attainment Challenge funding from April 22 be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you very much, Carol, for both that detailed overview and then the sort of more granular detail as well of individual projects and so on. Bring Councillor Donnelly in just now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Carol. I think that was an excellent detailed report, as the Chair said. And it's quite sad that we have to have a detailed report like this and deal with the attainment gap in our area, but nonetheless we have to. And I think I can take my hat off to a lot of the in-depth work that South Lanarkshire schools have done. 2 points. One was the PEF money and how schools have got really eagerly involved in that. I know at my area committee in Hamilton, we're going to show a wee video of Woodside and how they get involved in the PEF money and came up with a decision. And I think that's great for the council and for councillors to actually have a wee window of seeing how the kids got involved. And we might have wee politicians in the future with the way they took that on with vigour. I was very excited about it, and it certainly made me think. Also, I think with the breakfast clubs, all the work that we are doing is definitely so necessary within the communities and going forward, and it just shows you how that makes a difference in the communities for the kids, because they're there ready to sit up and take the learning processes the schools provide for them. So yep, the breakfast clubs, the PEF money, is all helping to narrow that gap that we are facing within the communities. And unfortunately, it is there. But that's not just within our remit to resolve. We're part of that wheel. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much for your comments, Councillor. And I agree, no doubt we've got some brilliant policymakers in the future coming up. And some of our younger children that I've seen talking about PEF, PB in their schools, including pupils have been invited along to parent councils and so on, and the confidence with which they spoke about it as well was admirable. It's fantastic. I'm going to bring in Councillor Mars, please.
Thank you. Yes, a really important result, and one that report rather, that one that actually, even in a long report like this, can't really encompass the amount of work and the incredible amount of effort that schools are going to on an individual basis to support young people and their families. I'm also aware that even besides this report and a lot of signposting and support, there's maybe smaller scale, but just as important supports in terms of ad hoc budgets for young people that perhaps don't have PE kit or stationery, and our schools are doing a huge amount of work in that way to support without stigma young people, and to make sure they have what they need. I'd be certainly very interested to know, those ad hoc budgets are fairly small, but are they being used to best effect so that young people are aware of those? I know that certainly Lanark Grammar, noted in this report, have done a lot of social media work directly to young people to encourage those that maybe don't have PE kit or similar to come forward and alert to school to that so that they could take advantage of that. But it would be really useful to know, are those budgets adequate? Do they need more? Is it and what's happening with that?
Thanks, Councillor. And Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Mars, you make an important point that this report doesn't reflect everything that is going on and doesn't attempt to reflect everything, and that I would say almost all our schools have been discretionary in their use of funding to ensure that they quietly support families who are most in need in terms of some of the things that you can't account for in a school improvement plan, like uniform, or have developed creative ways of doing swap shops, or drop-ins, or in fact in some cases buying items for young people. We do regularly monitor that. Given the nature of that discretionary spend, how we do that is through our work on cost of the school day and asking every school to provide a position statement. I think it would be more difficult to monitor the actual financial aspect of that because so much is done, as in a discretionary needs basis way. But it's certainly something, and I think as you've reflected, the equity team at the centre work extremely hard to keep this high in the agenda, and it's certainly something I'll take back to them and ask the question about whether there could be a more forensic way of looking at that. So I'll definitely take that back. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That's helpful. I think one of the focus on the cost of the school day that there's been increased focus over the last couple of years has been really good at shining a light on all of these small pieces of good work that we know have been going on quite discreetly often anyway, and most importantly it's developing a culture and a network for sharing them as well, and sharing those ideas between schools and between colleagues. So look forward to hearing some more on that as it continues to develop, and as you say, it continues to be high on the agenda. Thank you. If there's no further comments or questions on this report just now, are we happy to accept?
Accept, yeah.
Good, thank you. Right, we're moving on to item 15 in your pack. This is updated COVID-19 guidelines for schools and educational settings that came out at the start of last month. And Des Dixon's going to take us through this. Hello again, Des.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And hopefully just building on the items that have appeared before, that this is a fairly positive report in essence, because we need our schools to remain open to achieve some of the outcomes that we've heard this morning, including the equity debate earlier on. So this is an information paper for committee. I would say it's dynamic, because as soon as we had printed it for committee on the 20th of January, needless to say, we got further guidance last week on the 1st of February. But what I'll do for members is take them through what are the significant changes that came on the 5th of January. The Scottish Government, as you are probably aware, published on the 5th of January revised guidance on reducing the risks of COVID in schools and educational settings. And this came from the advice and guidance from the National Advisory Subgroup on Education and Children's Issues, as well as senior clinicians. And they published this new guidance based upon the latest clinical and public health assessments of the pandemic and for schools returning from their Christmas break. Now, as it so happened, our schools in South Lanarkshire returned on the 5th of January, the day that the guidance was published. So welcome back. That members of the committee will be well aware from the various briefings and reports, and the range of restrictions continue to remain in place for schools and educational settings, which does include visiting schools, including parents and carers at the moment, and in avoiding large assemblies and large gatherings. However, the essence of all of our approach from our council, there can be no doubt that it's the safety and well-being of our staff and pupils in schools who are at the front line, and of course all our learners. That continues to be a priority. So in paragraph 4, we highlight the changes that came into play from the 5th of January onwards, and there's a summary of the key mitigations for reference as provided in Appendix 1. The changes to the self-isolation guidance are summarised in paragraph 4.4, and members can be reassured that we still continue to liaise with NHSL Public Health for advice and guidance, and indeed the Pan Lanarkshire Tactical Group still operates, so that matters can be addressed on a daily basis. So we're taking calls, we're taking inquiries from schools should they have questions, and indeed they do, and we address them on a daily basis, and we seek professional health opinion on that. And that's very, very important. In paragraph 4.6, we highlight the importance of continuing with our risk assessments and infection control measures, including distancing where appropriate, the wearing of masks, and undertaking regular LFD tests as per the Scottish Government guidance in order to help keep everyone as safe as possible. And a key preventative action, as we've heard earlier on this morning, has been the need to assess on a daily basis the pattern of absences in our schools and services, and for management action to be taken to provide cover wherever possible, noting that as a mitigation, the Council had agreed previously to employ and deploy extra teaching staff, and that's been put into good use as we've had to make dynamic changes there. And of course, last week we heard exams are expected to take place, and prelims remain permitted and have indeed taken place in our secondary schools. And last week there was a slight change to whereby meetings of parent councils and PTAs can now take place on a face-to-face basis if there's a risk assessment undertaken, but to take a precautionary approach, and if it's been working online, to continue with that. So we're getting a bit more light on that one. In terms of this report, in paragraph 7, we make reference to the wearing of face coverings, noting that the First Minister is keeping this under review, and the advisory group was meeting this morning ahead of the First Minister's update, which is expected around 2 p.m. today. So we may get further guidance on that. And then coming into section 8, a very important topic, ventilation and heating. In para 8, we provide details on the position with regards to ventilation and on the ongoing work which is undertaken with housing and technical resources. It's perhaps, Chair, worth noting that in South Lanarkshire, we do, as we all recognise, have a very modern school estate, and whilst not being complacent, we do not intend to chop any of our door panels, and we continue to liaise with our professional associations and trade unions in what is a very important feature in helping to keep people safe. And just to give a wee update on that in terms of ventilation, because we know it's a topical subject right across, the Scottish Government guidance on CO2 monitoring. Housing and Tech have now been successful in acquiring the CO2 monitors. We'd mentioned that at the last committee. So they've now got success in acquiring the CO2, and we've received sufficient numbers over the next few weeks to be able to place a monitor in every learning space across the whole of the school estate. And the rollout of that programme began yesterday. So these monitors, what do? They monitor the CO2 reading and have visual indicators like a traffic light system, green, amber and red. And that allows the property professionals to make decisions and then take actions with regards to ventilation, which is, as I said earlier on, a very important subject within the classroom and teaching spaces. And of course, the good news continues in terms of vaccinations of young people, particularly those aged 12 and above. And I've shown the figures in there, and that continues to rise, which is very good. And I suppose it wouldn't be without me unless we actually say the essence of this approach, because it's not one, it's about partnership working, has been achieved through our partnership working, and indeed the commitment of our janitors and cleaners, and indeed our teachers and catering staff have all contributed to the successful approach of being able to maintain our schools in this current setting. And the preventative measures which have been taken in our schools will hopefully continue and help to mitigate against the spread of the coronavirus in the coming months. Needless to say, we will have a further update this afternoon from the First Minister, and there will no doubt be further guidance. So, in summary, Chair, the committee is asked to approve the recommendations in paragraph 2.2, which is the Scottish Government Guidance for Schools and Educational Settings, published on the 5th of January, in light of the emergence of the Omicron variant, and the key mitigations highlighted in Appendix 1 be noted, and that the further changes on the self-isolation policy, as noted in the report, be noted, and that the efforts, and I think I say this wholeheartedly, that the efforts of staff in our schools and educational settings to adapt to the ever-changing guidance when they return from their Christmas leave and New Year break, and in being able to be agile and flexible to enact these changes to help ensure the safety and well-being of children, young people and staff be noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Des, for the update on this incredibly important area of work, and also would absolutely echo your comments about the commitment of staff to implementing these guidelines and, more importantly, being agile and flexible as they have necessarily changed. Thank you. I'll bring in Councillor Hamilton, please.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I would also echo those comments about the staff and all the staff in the schools. I can't imagine what it's been like for the past 2 years, and they've done incredible work and had to be flexible about it. I've got a few questions, if that's okay, Des. One of my questions was how many doors are we going to chop up, but obviously you've answered that, so you don't need to clarify that. Thank God we're not doing any. But I was just wondering about how the vaccination rates are obviously high in South Lanarkshire, in line with national the national statistics, but I was just wondering if there's any work the schools are doing to encourage pupils to get their vaccine. I am truly of the opinion that we're going to vaccinate our way out of this. So what are the schools doing, if anything? As the other question, I suppose you were talking about staffing and the issues around that. I was just wondering, we'd obviously put money into extra teachers, and also teachers were being used on a roving basis to target the places that we need. How many of the teachers are then being used to fill gaps and when people are isolating and stuff like that, which obviously will need to be done, but I'm just wondering how much of their time is dedicated to the job that they've been handed. And I suppose it's just a point about face masks and how I really hope that it's obviously not the council's gift to take face masks away, but I really hope that the government do have a look at it again. And I know that's not the EIS's position, and we need to be safe for our staff and stuff, but I can't imagine what it's like having to sit in a classroom with your face mask on, and you can understand why people and parents and carers and the pupils themselves are wanting it taken away. Sorry about loads of stuff, but there's loads of stuff in the report, and it's a really good report. Thanks, Des.
No, thanks, Councillor, and a couple of really good questions here. And I wasn't aware that you were going to ask about the cutting off the doors there, so I'm glad we addressed that one. I think the one, I'll address the face mask one first of all. I mean, I do think, you'll have seen the opinions and views being expressed publicly there. And I think our view will always be the same as what it has been throughout, that we in education will take what is professional health advice and guidance. And as we said, we are aware that the group was meeting this morning and that the First Minister had agreed that she would give an update on the 8th of February this afternoon, and we await that. And no doubt progress will follow on in due course in the coming months. I think your question around the staffing is an excellent one, because I do think the impact of schools returning and the actions taken to mitigate against staff absences has been one where we at the centre have had to be very flexible, and none more so than my colleague Stuart Nicholson, who chairs the staffing meeting, along with colleagues from personnel. So it's a bit more than monitoring each day, if you know what I mean. We're monitoring the trends in the absences, and Carol through the CQIS on occasion as well, we've had to deploy some members of our centre team to cover where appropriate. I couldn't give you specific numbers per se, which was your question, but I would like to give you a reassurance that we have redeployed and maximised that resource which the council had invested in terms of the extra staffing, and that has been needed on a case-by-case basis. But we can look at the detail for you on that one. And then I think you make an excellent point in vaccinations. And I'd always say, and you would expect me to say, nothing happens in a vacuum here. Our schools have been at the forefront from day one in encouraging our parents and carers and indeed families to take up the vaccinations. And I would say that that comes with the strength of partnership working that we have with NHSL Public Health, because we've been working with their comms team also, who have pushed the boat out and done videos and various different things to try and promote that. But I think the proof is in the pudding. And sometimes it only takes some peers to go along and say, I've been vaccinated, and you get the friends and something else to go. And it's sometimes doing simple steps like that. So you're absolutely right. And I suppose if I was I'm taking a positive out of this one, that the vaccination rates, you're only as good as your last shout. And in South Lanarkshire, it is slightly above the national average at the moment. So that good news story, I think, is a way to go ahead and continue to drive that forward as best we can, because it is important. It is very, very important that in all of this that we're doing the best we can to keep people safe, but also to create safe learning environments. It's about trying to make the classrooms safe as best we can. So it has been a challenge, as you all know. It's been a challenge for everybody, none more so than our staff, as I said earlier on. And I thank you for your compliments to the staff on that basis, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Des. Okay, Lindsay? Yeah, great, thank you. I was smiling, Des, at your description of the peer pressure there. It's certainly, as parent of an S2, it was certainly a social event, and it was an occasion to go and be seen at the vaccination centre and compare times when they were going and meet up outside and be embarrassed that parents and carers were there and accompany them in the first place. All rather amusing, but if it works, it works. Great, thank you everyone for your comments and questions on that. If there's no further ones, we will move on. Does everyone accept this report?
Agreed.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, moving on, almost to the end, and we're continuing with another report from Des just now. This is on the COSLA Quality Awards, a wee bit of celebrating success, which is a nice note to nearly finish on. Thank you, Des.
Yes, Chair, and I think you summed up that very well. I mean, I think it's an honour and a pleasure for me to deliver this report at the end of, what's been a quite heavy business meeting. But I think it's also important to also recognise in the COVID world, because we tend to get caught up in that the wider achievements in the learner journeys of children and young people has been continuing, as well as the good work undertaken by our teachers and staff. And it's something that we believe deserves to be recognised, and particularly during these particular COVID times. And I think it's important just to take a wee breather, just to recognise the role education has in making the difference to the lives of young people, and the commitment of many staff across the council to work together in the best interests of communities is strong evidence of what can be achieved through unity when faced with adversity, undoubtedly. So staff throughout education have been working beside colleagues from other resources, have played a vital role in adapting to the challenges faced during this pandemic. But what we want to bring out of this report this morning is the celebrating success aspect. So, as this is the last education committee of this administration, we wanted to leave you with where we started, an insight into how the work by our staff in our schools and nurseries and services can and does make a difference. In Para 4 and Appendix 1, we show the range of submissions that were prepared for the highly prestigious COSLA Awards as a way of recognising and celebrating the success of some of the work that is ongoing across South Lanarkshire. We have shown a range of good practice under the various different categories in paragraph 4 and the breadth of learning that takes place that we've already heard this morning. And I'm delighted to say that the project that is there for the early years has reached the final stage of the COSLA Awards, and the others will be used as highlighted as shared best practice. So, Chair, it's quite ironic that we're leaving this administration, but in the sense of celebrating success. But you can see it's about innovation, it's about creativity, and it is about improvement. And that's exactly what we said on the tin when we came into our Education Resources Plan those many years ago. And again, we finish up by COP26 and sustainability getting due credit through the work of young people, and it being nominated as well. So it's my pleasure this morning, Chair, for the committee to approve the following recommendations: that nominations from schools and educational settings for the COSLA Quality Awards, as highlighted in Appendix 1, be noted; that the Early Years Equality and Diversity nomination is progressing to the final stages, and we wish them every success. And at a time when faced with unprecedented challenges due to the pandemic, it be noted that the ongoing work that has been and is making a difference to the lives of learners and families be recognised and be celebrated. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Des, for giving that report. Does anyone have any comments or questions on this just now? No, I can't see any. Well, best of luck to the project, which is going forward to the next stage of the COSLA Awards. And thank you, Des, for highlighting the other fantastic projects and initiatives which were welcomed in there. As I said, a very nice note to almost end on, sorry, Lynn, at the end of today's committee. Thanks for taking the time to go through that. Okay, our final item just now then, everyone, if we're happy to move on, is item 17. This is notice of contracts awarded from April last year to September 21, and Lynn is going to present this. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. Just very quickly, it's part of the normal process in terms of our standing orders and contracts that any tenders over £50,000 are reported retrospectively to committee, just simply for noting. So Appendix 1 has a full list of contracts that covers the period from April up until September 2021 on the offer of lowest offer, or on the basis of lowest offer, if you like, and most economically advantageous offer submitted, and we've accepted on that basis. So you'll see when you look at Appendix 1, it's a mix of companies, organisations, really to support the delivery of education in a variety of means. So it involves our early years partners, it involves ASN Transmore, there's some curricular activities and organisations we link within there, and also the partners that we link in with our school counselling services. So the information is just for noting for committee. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. Councillor Harrow.
I think I was in the wrong business, because under various contractors, the kind of childminders and whatever are getting a fairly reasonable £143.5 million. I'm assuming that's a misprint.
It's not. It actually covers a 10-year period. So we've been working with our partners to go through our new service agreement, which is the quality assurance aspects. We've been working our way through all the partners to bring them on, and that's the total figure of all of our partners over a 10-year period. I thought the same myself to begin with.
I was going to change my job, although I don't have one at the moment. But yeah, I'm into childminding. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Harrow. Councillor Allison and Councillor Daylan, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm aware that we have investigated the possibilities to whether school transport will come under the new under 22's free transport and not been successful. But can you tell us if any work is being done to identify public bus routes that could replace school transport and therefore cut the cost?
The Scottish Government at the moment have said that, you know, we're not looking at that just now. They want to get the scheme up and running and see what the implications of that are. Because at the moment there wouldn't be a service to just be able to switch over, but it's something we will be monitoring. We were talking about that this morning, about how in our contracts, I think we will actually start to monitor the number of people that apply, but we might also start to ask contractors how many children on a regular basis actually make use of their space. Now, we know there was always, sometimes on a Friday, Gran might take them to school or something, so they might not have used their space every day of the week anyway, but just to see how that might start to make a difference. So we're at the very early stages of seeing what impact that will have, but I'm sure in due course there will be an impact, and you would think there would be efficiencies to come.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Lynn. Councillor Nealon, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just curious here, apart from the £143.5 million, somewhat eye-watering, so can you just indulge me, please? Why are we using childminding and nanny contractors? Thank you.
I think they provide some of the service provision for the 2-year-olds, I think, from families seeking work. So there is an opportunity for some of the childminders to get that part of the business in terms of childcare as part of the early learning and childcare. That childcare element can go to them.
Right, thank you. I just thought for a minute there that they were actually going into our education.
Oh, you're on mute, Councillor Nealon. Didn't hear the last sentence or so.
No, thank you. Mute's probably the best place for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? No, I can't see any. I'm happy to accept the report.
Second, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Lynn. Okay, everyone, I don't have any items of urgent business, but since this is the last committee of the session, I wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for their attendance and their contributions over the past few years during this session, both our councillors and our external representatives and our officers as well. I loved Desi's words earlier about how the resource can and does make a difference, and I also thought it was appropriate that we bookended the sessions committee with that message as we started. At the end of the day, I know that all of us in here share vision and ambition for our children and young people, and I hope you found this a worthwhile and an interesting forum to sit in this session. Also, obviously, thank you to all of the officers and support staff who have kept the committee running and have presented reports and so on. It's obviously been a period of change and disruption, particularly over the last few years. So thank you for all of your updates through the strange times, all of the support you've provided to us, which we've been able to provide to our establishments as well, and all of your work to bring us an overview and a flavour of the commitment and the hard work of the practitioners and the parents and the carers that sits behind it all, supporting our children and young people. So thank you very much, and thanks for today's contributions as well, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.